If that dog starts howling again tonight, I swear I'm sleeping in the car with earplugs." That was the first thing I muttered out loud while throwing my jacket across the couch after my shift at the diner. It had been a long Thursday. Plates had been dropped. A couple of customers yelled about their eggs being too runny, and I accidentally poured hot coffee into a glass meant for orange juice. But what really grated on me wasn't the job or my aching feet. It was that dog. Every night, just past 10, a deep, echoing howl would rise from the corner of the parking lot near the old oak and birch hardware store. You'd hear it bounce off the cracked pavement, snake around the light posts, and drift past the boarded-up bakery like a ghost with a purpose. A single, long, dragging howl. Then a pause. Then another. No barking. No scratching. Just that lonesome, hollow sound. It chilled you in a way you didn't expect from an animal. My name's Brian McCleary. I manage the evening shift at Lenny's Family Diner off Route 43 in Hartswell, a sleepy little town where the biggest excitement is when someone leaves their hazard lights on in the Walmart parking lot. I'd started noticing the howling about a month ago. At first, I thought someone's pet had gotten loose, or maybe it was a stray. But then I saw him. It was last week. I was taking the trash out back when I spotted movement under the flickering security light near the dumpster. There he was. A shaggy, medium-sized dog with brown and black fur and a white stripe down his snout. Looked like he might have been part collie or shepherd, maybe even something wild mixed in. His coat was matted, and he was thin but not skeletal. He didn't run when he saw me. He just stared with those round, soulful eyes and then turned his head toward the empty parking lot, like he wanted me to follow. But I didn't. I went back inside. Then the howling started again that night. Tonight, I sat on my porch after work, sipping warm root beer from a bottle. The night air was crisp, and the stars had that strange clarity you only get in small towns far from the city lights. And right on cue, I heard it again. That same haunting sound. This time, something pulled at me. It wasn't just curiosity. It felt like I owed it to the dog, or whatever was making that noise, to finally see it through. I grabbed my flashlight, jacket, and keys and got in my old pickup. The parking lot was empty except for a few shopping carts gathered in a crooked line near the old Payless sign. The hardware store stood like a skeleton, its windows painted black, its doors chained shut for over a year now. I parked under the only working streetlight and shut off the engine. There he was, sitting near the corner where the lot met the overgrown trail to the woods. Same posture, same tilt of the head. His ears twitched when he heard the engine go quiet, and then he looked at me. "All right, buddy," I said, stepping out. "Let's see what this is all about." He didn't move when I approached, just stood and turned toward the trail, giving one quick glance back at me before disappearing into the trees. I hesitated. It wasn't exactly the brightest idea to follow a stray dog into the woods at night, but something about this didn't feel random, so I followed. The trail twisted through the pines and dipped past a small, dried-up creek bed. I kept the flashlight steady, careful not to spook him. He stayed just far enough ahead that I couldn't quite touch him, but close enough that I could see his silhouette weaving through the trees. After about 10 minutes of walking, he stopped. There, nestled in the underbrush behind a fallen log, was an old blue tent. Torn along the seams, its nylon sides flapped in the breeze. A rusted camping stove sat beside it. And in front of the tent, wrapped in a bundle of blankets, was a person. I froze. The dog padded over, circled the bundle twice, and lay down beside it, resting his head gently on the figure's side. I stepped closer and saw an old man. White hair, beard untrimmed, his face lined and weathered. He wasn't moving. My stomach clenched. I knelt down and put a hand near his mouth. Warm breath. He was alive. I didn't waste another second. I called 911, gave them my coordinates as best I could, and stayed with the man and the dog until the ambulance arrived. He stirred once while we waited, opened his eyes briefly, and muttered, "Buster, still here?" I nodded, not knowing if that was the dog's name, but somehow sure it was. Turns out the man's name was Walter Cooper, a retired welder from Alabama who had come up north years ago after losing his wife. He'd fallen on hard times and had been living out of that tent for months. Nobody knew he was there. No one but Buster. The vet later said Buster was part Australian Shepherd, part lab, and all heart. He had probably been with Walter for years. And somehow, after Walter fell ill and couldn't walk far, Buster took it upon himself to go find help, or at least to cry out for it every night until someone listened. That someone ended up being me. Walter recovered slowly in the hospital, and Buster was allowed to visit him twice a week. The bond between them was something you didn't see every day. Quiet, loyal, steady. I started bringing Buster extra food from the diner. When Walter got strong enough, we helped move him into a senior care home nearby, where they allowed him to keep Buster with him. The old dog had earned it. Word spread around town quickly. Folks who hadn't spoken to Walter in years started visiting. They brought him clothes, food, even a new pair of boots. And Buster? Well, he got a new leash, a name tag, and a cozy blanket that matched Walter's. Now, every time I hear a dog howling in the distance, I don't groan or reach for the earplugs. I listen. Because you never know when that sound might be a call for help, or a sign of love too loyal to quit. But this wasn't the end of Buster's story. Not even close. The first time I brought Buster to the diner, I didn't think he'd behave himself. I mean, this was a dog who'd lived in the woods for months, maybe longer. But he trotted in like he'd been coming for coffee and pancakes every morning since he was a pup. His paws padded softly across the linoleum floor, his nose twitching at the scent of bacon and fried potatoes. But he didn't beg. He just sat beside me at the corner booth while I sipped my coffee and flipped through the local paper. Betty, who'd worked the morning shift for 23 years and didn't even blink when the roof leaked, came around with a skeptical look. "He house-trained?" "He's better than me," I said, rubbing behind Buster's ear. "Hasn't barked once, hasn't begged, just sits there like he owns the place." Betty eyed him a moment longer, then tossed a slice of ham from her plate onto the floor. Buster sniffed it, then looked up at me. "Go ahead," I said. He scarfed it up in one neat motion. Betty nodded. "All right, he can stay. But if he lifts a leg anywhere near the jukebox, you're cleaning it." Buster didn't lift his leg. He didn't even move from that spot until I stood up an hour later. After that, it became our little routine. I'd work the evening shift, then come back the next morning with Buster and grab breakfast before heading over to visit Walter. Most days, Walter was sitting in his wheelchair under the big maple tree outside Pine Hill Care Home, wrapped in a flannel blanket, his white beard fluffed out like a puffball. His health was getting better. His spirits were another story. "Don't know what I'm still doing here," he'd say, eyes squinting against the sun. "You're here because you've still got stories to tell," I'd reply, handing him a coffee. "And because Buster would raise Cain if you disappeared on him." Walter would chuckle, but it never quite reached his eyes. One morning, as we were heading out, Nurse Cindy caught up to me at the curb. "He's not eating much," she said quietly, glancing back toward Walter. "Keeps giving us most of his meals untouched. I think he's more tired than he lets on." "I'll talk to him," I said, but I knew talk wasn't going to be enough. Walter needed something else, something to look forward to. That night, I sat on my porch again, Buster beside me, his chin on my boot. The stars were out, just like they had been the first time I followed that howl, and I started wondering what had kept Buster going. Out there on his own, night after night, hungry, cold, calling out into a world that didn't answer for weeks. Hope. That had to be it. The next morning, I brought a big manila envelope with me to the care home. Inside were photos I'd printed from my old camera, pictures of Walter and Buster together under the tree, shots from the diner, even one of Buster nose deep in a meatloaf someone had dropped. I handed them to Walter and waited. His hands were slow, but they trembled less than before. He looked at each one, eyebrows lifting just a hair. These are good, he said. You've got a story here, I told him. And people would want to hear it. What Buster did. What you've been through. Walter shook his head. No one wants to hear about an old man in a tent. Maybe not, I said. But they'll want to hear about a dog who howled in a parking lot for weeks until someone finally listened. And the man who gave him a name. He was quiet, a long time. Then he looked down at Buster and said, he deserves a real story, not just scraps. Over the next few days, I brought a notebook every time I visited. I'd ask questions and let Walter talk. About Alabama. About the welding jobs in Tennessee. About the long drive north when he couldn't stay in his house after his wife passed. He talked about Buster, too, and how they'd found each other outside a gas station near Little Rock. Both cold, both hungry. He just walked up and sat beside me, Walter said. Didn't bark, didn't beg, just sat there like he was already mine. Eventually, I typed it all up and showed him the draft. He made a few changes, corrected the year he got Buster, and added a detail about the blue collar with the silver bell. Then he said something that caught me off guard. Let's share it. Maybe there's someone out there who needs to hear it. Someone who's listening for a howl. I submitted it to the local paper under the title, The Dog Who Waited. It ran on a Thursday, and by Friday morning, folks were stopping me on the street to ask if the story was true. Every word, I told them. Betty laminated the article and hung it by the cash register. People started visiting the care home, not just to drop off things for Walter, but to ask if they could meet Buster. The home director arranged for a little fenced-off area in the back garden just for Walter and Buster to sit together, away from the crowd, but close enough for the kids to wave. A second article followed in the County Gazette. Then a radio interview. Then someone from the city paper called. Walter let me speak for him most of the time, but Buster always stole the show. And through it all, Walter started eating again. One afternoon in mid-July, I got to the home and found Walter wasn't outside. Nurse Cindy told me he was feeling tired again, so I went up to his room. He was sitting in a recliner by the window, Buster curled beside him. The room smelled of peppermint tea and the faint scent of a citrus cleaner. Been thinking, Walter said without turning. You ever hear of the Hartswell Community Park project? Sure, I said. They're trying to build a new playground and a dog run. Been raising funds for years. Still a long way off. He nodded. Tell them they can use our story. For the fundraiser. Use the photos too. Whatever gets them the help they need. And that was how Buster became the face of the project. A banner went up at the diner. Buster's Park. Help build hope. Local shops pitched in. A group of middle schoolers made posters. A retired vet offered free checkups for adopted dogs. Donations trickled in, then flowed. The town came together in a way I hadn't seen since the 4th of July parade 5 years back. That night, as I walked Buster back to the truck, he stopped suddenly by the light post where he used to howl. He sniffed the air, then sat and looked up at me. I knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shaggy neck. "We heard you," I said. "And now the whole town's listening." He didn't howl, just nudged my hand, stood, and walked on. And somehow, I knew he was leading me again. But this time, not toward a cry for help, toward something we hadn't even seen yet. And that's when I realized this was only the beginning of what Buster had to show us. Not the end. Not even close. The summer rolled forward like the slow hum of cicadas behind a screen door, and Buster became more than a dog to our town. He was a symbol of hope, of loyalty, of quiet, unshakable love. And while Walter's health still had its ups and downs, something had shifted in him. He had a purpose now, a reason to keep getting out of bed, to keep sharing the story he'd once thought no one would care about. One Monday morning, I walked into the diner to find the place buzzing. Not with the usual breakfast rush chatter or someone griping about burnt toast, but with real excitement. "They're coming next weekend," Betty whispered the second I stepped through the door. "A real camera crew, from the state network. They want to do a segment on Buster." I blinked at her, still halfway through yawning. "Come again?" "You heard me. They want to do a short feature, one of those heart of the state stories they play before the evening news. It's already scheduled. Sunday at 3. I glanced down at Buster, who was sprawled beside the jukebox like he was part of the decor. He let out a low huff, then promptly rolled over. "I guess we better trim him up a bit. Maybe buy a bow tie." That week flew by in a haze of preparations. Walter had his best flannel shirt washed and ironed by one of the nurses. Buster got the works at the local groomer, who volunteered his time free of charge. I spent most of my evenings putting together a little photo board for the shoot, one that showed Buster and Walter at each point in their journey. Folks dropped off baked goods for the crew, and someone even repainted the welcome sign outside Pine Hill Care Home. The camera crew arrived just before lunch. A tall redhead named Carl handled the interviews, and a quiet woman with a kind smile named Tessa filmed. They were polite, professional, and genuinely interested. I sat with Walter under the big maple tree while Carl asked him questions. His voice was softer than usual, and every answer he gave carried weight. Not because of how loud he said it, but because of how much he meant every word. Buster, of course, didn't say a thing, but he sat right next to Walter the whole time, head held high, tail wagging gently. Like he knew he was part of something big, and that the camera was there for him. Afterward, they filmed Buster playing with the neighborhood kids in the little garden space behind the home. The squeals and laughter echoed across the lawn, and for once, Walter didn't just smile. He laughed. A full, belly-deep laugh that made Nurse Cindy step out to see what the fuss was about. That night, I brought Buster back home and sat on the porch again. The stars were out, and the air carried that hint of coolness that meant fall was thinking about arriving. I scratched behind his ears. "You did good, buddy," I said. He wagged his tail and leaned into me. 3 days later, the news segment aired. Folks gathered at the diner to watch it on the old mounted TV near the pies. We had a full house, teachers, truckers, retirees, even a few high schoolers who usually couldn't be bothered to wake before noon. When Walter's voice came on, the place went quiet. You could hear every word. When the story ended and the screen faded back to the anchor, no one moved for a moment. Then someone clapped, then another. Then the whole place was filled with applause. "To Buster!" someone shouted, raising a mug. "And to Walter," I added. More clapping. The next day, donations for the park nearly doubled. A woman from 3 towns over called the diner to say she wanted to donate an entire bench in honor of her late husband, who had loved dogs just as much. She never met Buster, but she said she understood him. As the town kept talking about the segment, Walter seemed lighter. He even started joining group activities at the home: bingo on Thursdays, movie night on Saturdays. And then, just as the heat of August began to shift, Walter surprised me again. "I want to go to the school," he said. "The high school?" He nodded. They called and asked if I'd come speak. About Buster, about the story. I told them yes, but only if you come too. The day we walked into Hartswell High, the whole cafeteria had been rearranged. There were rows of chairs, a makeshift stage, and a big banner that said, "Welcome Walter and Buster." The students were more attentive than I expected. Not a single phone was out. Walter spoke slowly, but clearly, and Buster lay right at his feet, glancing up now and then like he was listening too. Walter told them how sometimes life gets quiet and lonely, but there's always someone or something worth holding on for. He said the real strength wasn't in fighting or yelling, but in waiting and staying and never giving up. Afterward, a few students came up and hugged him. Others pet Buster and asked if they could take selfies. One boy, tall, lanky, with a buzz cut, stood back a little longer. Then he stepped up and said, "My dad passed last year. Our dog stopped eating after, until I started sleeping next to him again. It helped, so thank you." Walter shook his hand. "You helped him first. He just let you know." That night, I didn't sleep much. Not because anything was wrong, but because everything felt so full of meaning, full of the quiet hum of something working right for once. The next week, construction began on the first piece of Buster's Park. It wasn't big yet, just a fence, a shaded bench area, and a grassy patch, but it was real. Kids came after school to help. Someone's grandpa brought his old wheelbarrow. A retired landscaper offered to plant flowers, and Buster supervised it all, tongue out, tail wagging, watching the community build something that started with a howl. But there was one more surprise we didn't see coming. Walter had a brother. No one knew. Not even Walter mentioned him until one day he looked up from his oatmeal and said, "I think it's time to write to Richard." Turns out Richard lived out in Montana. They hadn't spoken in over 30 years. Something about a falling out after their mother passed. But Walter, inspired by everything going on, decided it was time. He sent a letter, and Richard wrote back. 2 weeks later, a silver sedan pulled into the parking lot at Pine Hill. A tall man stepped out, maybe 10 years younger than Walter, wearing suspenders and a baseball cap that read, "Bozeman Feed and Grain." He walked in and hugged his brother without a word. Just wrapped his arms around him like they hadn't missed a day. Buster sat and watched, then barked once, like he approved. The town got even more involved after that. Walter and Richard were seen walking together along the park trail, Buster bouncing between them like he was playing referee. More families donated. More stories came out. Everyone seemed to have one now. And all because a dog wouldn't stop howling in a parking lot. But Buster wasn't done leading us. Not yet. Not by a long shot. By the time autumn started to touch the edges of Hartswell with orange leaves and that familiar crispness in the morning air, Buster had become something of a celebrity. Kids shouted his name when they saw him from across the street. Seniors in walkers would save bits of toast for him when they passed the park. Even the mayor had stopped by Pine Hill to get a picture with him and Walter, an image that ended up framed in the town hall lobby with a little plaque underneath that read, "Loyalty lives here." But fame never changed Buster. Every morning, he still waited by the diner door until I finished my shift, and every afternoon he rode in the passenger seat with his head out the window, ears flapping in the wind. Walter called it his patrol route, and it kind of was. We'd drive past the park, swing by the post office, and loop around the elementary school before heading back to the care home. One of those drives took a different turn. We were pulling out of the lot near the fire station when Buster started whining. Not a loud bark, just that low, urgent sound like he was trying to tell me something. His ears perked, and he stared out the window toward a cluster of overgrown brush behind the old train station. I slowed down. "What is it, boy?" He pressed his nose to the glass, tail stiff. I turned the wheel and pulled over by the gravel edge of the lot. The brush had grown thick over the years. Thorns, ivy, branches tangled like someone had planted them for the sole purpose of keeping secrets hidden. I opened the door, and Buster leapt out, nose down, paws moving fast. I followed. He led me through a narrow path only a dog could have noticed, weaving around rusted rail spikes and crumbling wooden pallets. And then, behind a fallen metal sign that read, "Do not enter," we found it. A makeshift shelter. Blankets draped over crates. A blue tarp half covered the top. Empty food cans were stacked neatly to the side. And curled up behind a pile of old clothes was a girl. Maybe 14. Skinny. Pale. Her eyes shot open when she heard us, and she pressed back into the wall of the shelter. "It's okay," I said quickly, raising my hands. "We're not here to hurt you." Buster took a step forward, then lay down, tail wagging gently. She didn't speak, just stared. "My name's Brian," I said. "This is Buster. You okay?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "He found me. The dog. I thought I was dreaming." "What's your name?" "Emily." We sat there for a few minutes. I didn't move closer, didn't pressure her. Just let Buster do his magic. After a while, she reached out and touched his head. He licked her fingers and lay his head in her lap. That's when she started crying. She told me she'd run away from a group foster home 2 towns over. Said it wasn't safe there, that the staff yelled more than they spoke, that she wasn't going back, that she'd rather live in the woods. "You hungry?" I asked. She nodded. I handed her a sandwich from the glove box. Betty always packed me 2. She ate half, gave the other half to Buster. After some time, I convinced her to come with me. Not to the police, not to the foster home, but to Pine Hill. Walter would know what to do, I figured. Turns out he did. When I walked into Walter's room with Buster and Emily, he looked up and didn't ask a single question. Just nodded and pointed to the armchair. "Sit down, hon. You look tired." She did. Over the next few hours, Walter talked to her like he'd known her all her life. He asked nothing personal, unless she brought it up. He told her about Alabama, about his late wife, about Buster. She listened. Really listened. And then, out of nowhere, she said, "I don't like the dark." Walter nodded. "Me neither. But you're not in it now." Eventually, we contacted a local social worker Walter trusted, Mary Jenkins, someone who'd helped him years ago during a tough time. She came and talked to Emily, not like a case, but like a person. And after a few days, they worked out a plan. A host family, just for now, a chance to go back to school. Safety. But before she left, she hugged Walter. Then she hugged Buster. "I thought I was alone," she said. Then he came. And I wasn't. After she left, Walter turned to me and said, "Told you, he's still leading." That night, I couldn't help but think about how different things would have been if I hadn't followed that howl weeks ago. If I'd just gone to bed. If I hadn't listened. As fall deepened, more leaves fell, and the days started shortening. But everything in Hartswell felt fuller, stronger, better. Walter had his brother. Emily had a chance. Buster had a community. And every day, something new happened. A woman found her lost cat after Buster barked outside her shed for 20 minutes. A man who hadn't walked in months swore Buster inspired him to try. A little boy who wouldn't speak said his first word after Buster visited his classroom. "Dog," he said. The teacher cried. Buster didn't do any of it for praise. He just did what needed to be done. Quietly, faithfully, without asking for anything in return. And still, I had the feeling he was waiting. For something else. For someone else. For a trail he hadn't walked yet. And I knew when the time came, he'd find it. Because that's who he was. Not just a dog. He was the soul of Hartswell. And his story wasn't even close to finished. It was the first real cold snap of the season when Buster found his next trail. I had just stepped out of the diner after a long shift, breath puffing out in front of me like little steam clouds, when I noticed him sitting near the truck, looking unusually still. Not alert, not wagging. Just sitting, watching the road. "You all right, buddy?" I asked, walking over. He looked up at me, then back at the road, and gave a low, soft whine. Not urgent like the time we found Emily. Just sad. That night, he didn't jump into the truck right away. Instead, he waited by the curb until a delivery van passed, then turned and hopped up. I didn't think much of it, but the next day, he did it again. Same spot, same stare, same soft sound. I decided to ask around. The diner crowd always knew everything before the papers did. Over lunch, I brought it up to Betty and Tom Gleason, who ran the bait shop down the street. "That dog's been waiting for someone," Tom said between bites of cornbread. "Maybe someone who used to park there." "You think it's a habit?" I asked. "Could be," Betty said. "Or maybe it's someone who used to feed him. You remember before you took him in, he could have had others. People don't always see the ones looking out for them." That stuck with me. The next day, I took a thermos of coffee and sat with Buster on the curb. Every time a car passed, he lifted his head slightly, then dropped it. No bark, no tail wag. "You're looking for someone, aren't you?" I said. He didn't move. I started asking around the neighborhood, mostly the folks living in the small row of houses just behind the diner. That's how I met Maggie Winters. She was in her 80s, sharp as a tack, and wore 2 long braids that reached past her shoulders. "I knew that dog," she said when I showed her a photo of Buster. "He used to sit with George." "George?" "George McAllister. Lived 2 houses down from me. Old Army vet. Used to walk with a cane and always had dog biscuits in his pocket. I'd see that mutt sitting with him every morning while George smoked his pipe on the porch. Didn't say much, just sat. Like they were listening to the world together." "Where's George now?" "Passed on 6 weeks ago. Had a heart attack while walking to the mailbox. Folks didn't notice for a while because he lived alone. It was quiet." I swallowed hard. So Buster had known him, cared for him, and now he was still waiting by the curb, hoping for a man who wasn't coming back. I visited George's house the next day. It was shuttered, lawn overgrown, mailbox taped shut. The bank must have claimed it. I stood at the edge of the porch and looked down where Buster likely used to sit. Sure enough, there were faded paw prints in the dust. When I got back to the truck, Buster was there, sitting, watching the road again. "He's gone, buddy," I said quietly. "I know you miss him. I know." Buster didn't move. But that night, for the first time in days, he slept through without whimpering. I told Walter about it the next morning. He remembers everything, Walter said. Every scent, every face. But mostly, he remembers kindness. That man must have given him that. Dogs never forget where they felt safe. That line sat with me the rest of the day. When the news got around town about Buster's vigil, people started leaving flowers at George's old porch. Some folks left letters, others left drawings their kids made of a dog under a starry sky. One woman brought a photo of her own father, who had also served in the army, and placed it by the mailbox. By the end of the week, it looked like a small shrine. And then a letter came, not addressed to me, not to the diner, but to Buster. Care of Pine Hill Care Home. It was from George's niece, a woman named Linda who lived in Michigan. She'd seen the news segment and had been meaning to visit George before he passed. The letter thanked Buster for being there, for not letting George be lonely, for sitting with him day after day. She enclosed a photo, George on the porch with Buster lying at his feet. You could see the pipe in George's hand, the morning sun lighting up Buster's fur like gold. Walter stared at that photo for a long time. "Frame it," he said. "Put it in the diner, next to the register." I did. A week later, a small wooden bench was placed in front of George's house. Carved into it was a message. In memory of George McAllister and the friend who never left. Buster sat beside that bench every morning for a while, just for a few minutes, like he was saying goodbye slowly, gently. Then he stopped waiting. He started leading again. It was Buster who found the puppy, cold, wet, shivering in the storm drain near the high school, barely old enough to walk. Buster had been sniffing the grates and barking non-stop until someone got maintenance to check. When they pulled out the pup, covered in grime and barely responsive, Buster licked its face and didn't leave its side the whole ride to the vet. We named her Millie. She was a mix of something small and scrappy, tan with one floppy ear and a bark like a squeaky door hinge, and she adored Buster. She followed him everywhere. He tolerated her like an old soul dealing with a toddler. Patient, steady, watchful. Millie gave Buster new purpose. He started walking farther, playing more. He showed her the town like he was passing on secrets. She'd dart around him, barking, while he trotted slowly behind her with that big dog smile. And as the leaves gave way to the first snows of winter, it became clear that Hartswell had changed for good. Kids started drawing chalk pictures of dogs all over the sidewalks. The mayor declared October 12th, Buster Day, with free hot dogs at the diner and a parade that featured every dog in town. The new playground at the park opened with a sign that read, "Because every howl deserves an answer." Walter had good days and quiet ones. On the good days, he'd sit outside, and Millie would nap beside him while Buster kept guard. On the quiet ones, I'd sit with him and read letters folks had sent in. There were dozens now, stories of dogs who waited, who found, who healed. And every single one of them felt like a note in a song that Buster had started. A song still being written, still being sung. One howl at a time. The first big snow hit Hartswell the day before Thanksgiving. Thick flakes began falling in the early afternoon, and by sundown, the streets were blanketed in white. Every rooftop looked frosted, every tree dusted like a powdered cake. At the diner, we kept the heat turned up and the coffee flowing. The regulars huddled around their mugs, talking about snowplows and salt shortages, but Buster and Millie were out in it like it was the best day of their lives. Buster moved slower in the cold, his hips a little stiffer, but he still trotted alongside Millie as she leapt into snowbanks and rolled like she'd been waiting her whole short life for this moment. I watched them from the window during my shift, and every so often a customer would lean over to say, "That dog's still out there showing us how it's done." That evening, after closing, I wrapped Millie in an old fleece blanket and opened the truck door. Buster climbed in without needing a word. The wind howled as we drove toward Pine Hill, snow crunching under the tires. When we arrived, Walter was already at the window, waving. Inside, the warmth of the care home hit like an embrace. Someone had put up a tree in the lobby, lights twinkling red and gold, and the faint scent of cinnamon drifted in the air. Walter sat near the fireplace, a flannel quilt over his knees, and the biggest smile on his face when he saw Buster. "There's my boy," he said, patting the floor beside him. Buster eased down with a small groan, and Millie curled up against him immediately. I brought a bag of turkey sandwiches from the diner, plus a thermos of cider that Betty had sent for Walter. We ate, while the snow fell outside in steady sheets. Walter turned to me. "You know what I miss the most about holidays?" "What's that?" "Noise, kids laughing, boots clomping in, people shouting across the table. Messes." "We could try to recreate that," I said. "Get the town together, make a little noise." He chuckled. "Might scare the nurses, but it's a good idea." So we planned it. A Hartswell community holiday potluck, hosted at Pine Hill the Sunday before Christmas. The home's director gave the green light, especially after hearing Walter was behind it. Invitations went out to every household in town, and by the end of the week, the RSVP list had outgrown the cafeteria. We moved the tables into the great room. Lights were strung from the ceiling to the windows. Kids brought ornaments to hang on the tree. A few of the older high schoolers put together a little band, and they practiced carols out behind the gym after class. Someone even donated a sleigh that we propped up at the entrance for pictures, with Buster front and center, of course. Millie took to the preparations like she'd been organizing holiday events her whole life. She followed volunteers around with her tiny tail wagging, barked whenever someone dropped a decoration, and more than once ran off with ribbons in her mouth like she had a wrapping deadline to meet. The morning of the event, I arrived early with Buster and Millie. Walter was already up, dressed in his best sweater and a red scarf that Nurse Cindy had knitted just for him. "Think we'll get a crowd?" he asked. "You'll see," I said. By 3 o'clock, the parking lot was full. Folks came with trays of green bean casseroles, pies, hams, cookies, and all sorts of recipes passed down through generations. The whole care home smelled like love and cinnamon. Kids played tag between the chairs, knocking into legs and apologizing with giggles. Parents chatted with residents. Teachers hugged former students. Strangers introduced themselves like neighbors. And in the middle of it all, Buster moved from group to group, letting hands ruffle his ears and kids wrap their arms around him. Millie stuck close behind, peeking around him like a sidekick on her first mission. Walter sat beside the fireplace, a small table in front of him covered in a spread of lemon bars and oatmeal cookies. People lined up to greet him. Some just wanted to shake his hand. Others told him how the story of him and Buster changed their view of the world. One woman said it had inspired her to reconnect with her father after 20 years. I watched from across the room and felt something settle in my chest. Not heavy, not sad, just full. Like a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Then a little boy walked up, holding a hand-drawn card. He was maybe 7, hair sticking out in all directions, nose running just a little. "This is for your dog," he said, handing the card to Walter. Walter opened it slowly. Inside was a drawing of Buster with a crown on his head. Above it, the words, "Thank you for finding everyone." Walter didn't say anything for a while, just nodded. Then he looked up at me and said, "That's exactly what he did." Didn't he? After everyone had gone home and the chairs were being stacked, I sat beside Walter by the fire again. Buster lay between us. Millie snored under the quilt. "You ever wonder," Walter said, "what would have happened if you hadn't listened that first night? If you'd just gone to bed like all the other nights before?" "I think about it every day," he nodded. "Sometimes the smallest choices turn out to be the biggest doors." Outside, the snow had started falling again, soft and slow. The fire crackled beside us. Walter leaned back in his chair. "I don't know how long I've got left, Brian," he said after a long pause. "But I do know this. Whatever time it is, it's enough. Because I got to see what this town could be when one dog reminded us all to care." I didn't know what to say, so I just sat there, watching the snow gather on the window. Buster stretched and put his head on Walter's foot, and the quiet that settled around us wasn't heavy at all. It felt like peace, like something still growing, like the next trail hadn't appeared yet, but when it did, we'd be ready, because Buster would find it. He always did. January and Hartswell hit like a hard knock on a frozen door. The kind of cold that reached into your bones even through wool socks and double layers. The streets were quiet most mornings, save for the rumble of snowplows and the occasional crunch of boots on packed ice. Still, every day, Buster and Millie made their rounds like clockwork. No storm, no frost, no sleet ever stopped them. They had a new stop now, Benton House, just off River Street, where a group of young adults with developmental disabilities lived under assisted care. I hadn't even known the place existed until Buster pulled me that way one morning on our walk. We passed it every day, but that morning he stopped at the gate, tail still, nose pointed. Then he barked, just once, then again. A soft, alert sound. Curious. A woman stepped out of the front door, bundled in a long brown coat and a wool hat that looked hand-knitted. "Can I help you?" she called. Not me," I said, motioning to Buster, "but I think he wants to meet someone." She laughed, but then her face changed. Not with suspicion, more like surprise. "That's the dog from the story, isn't it? The one with Walter?" "That's him." She waved us over. Her name was Annie. She ran the morning group sessions at Benton House and had seen the feature on Buster a few months ago. When I explained why we were outside, she said, "Funny thing, one of our residents, Nick, he's been asking to meet the dog from the TV every week since that aired." Nick was 24, shy, and usually hard to reach, Annie said. He didn't speak much, preferred puzzles and drawings, but when we walked in with Buster and Millie, he lit up like a Christmas tree. Didn't say a word, just sat cross-legged on the floor while Buster slowly walked over and gently placed a paw on his knee. Nick smiled. The next hour flew. Buster stayed right by Nick, letting him stroke his fur in long, slow motions. Millie bounced around the other residents, happy to let everyone touch her soft ears and tiny paws. One girl, Denise, kept giggling every time Millie sneezed, which was often, thanks to the dry air. Afterward, Annie asked if we'd be willing to come back. "Anytime," I said. "Looks like Buster's already added it to his route." So we returned every Wednesday. It became a routine, like everything else in Buster's world. He'd start his morning with a slow walk around the park, then trot down River Street toward Benton House like he was keeping an appointment. Nick would be waiting on the porch, usually with a new drawing in his hand. Always of Buster. One day, Nick finally spoke while petting Buster's head. Safe. Just that word. But Annie said it was the first he'd spoken in almost 2 months. By the third visit, Benton House had cleared a corner of their community room for a Buster board, filled with sketches, photos, and handwritten notes from the residents. One read, "When he walks in, it's like winter takes a nap." Walter loved hearing about it. I'd bring photos each week, and he'd look through them with a soft smile on his face. "He's building a trail of hearts," Walter said. "One at a time." In early February, Buster slowed down a little. Just a step or two here and there, but I noticed. Millie noticed too. She'd stick closer to his side, her usual energy dialed back, like she understood he needed space to move at his own pace. I took him to the vet, just to be sure. Doc Harrison checked him over and gave a small nod. "Just age catching up," he said. "Hips are stiff, lungs a little raspy, but that's normal. Keep him warm, keep him moving, and most of all, keep his spirit fed." "He feeds everyone else's," I said. "Then he's got a full pantry." Still, I made adjustments. Shorter walks, softer food, extra time on the heating pad, and Millie started sleeping closer to him, like a living blanket. One chilly morning, as I opened the diner, a man walked in who I didn't recognize. Tall, mid-30s, with wind-chapped cheeks and boots that had seen too many miles. "You're the guy with the dog," he said. "That depends on who's asking." He reached into his coat and pulled out a photo. It was faded, folded at the corners. It showed a younger Walter, maybe in his early 40s, standing beside a battered pickup truck. Next to him was a boy, about 10, and between them, a young dog that looked almost like a twin of Buster. "My name's Evan," the man said. "Walter's my dad." I stared. He never said, "We had a falling out a long time ago. Over stupid things. Pride, mostly. I saw the story online. My wife made me watch it. She said, 'That man is hurting and doesn't know how to ask you back.'" "He talks about trails," I said softly. "Says Buster's been leading him back to things he thought were gone." Evan looked down at the photo. "I think it's time I followed the trail back too." That afternoon, I drove him to Pine Hill. Buster came along. He sat up straighter in the seat than he had in days. Maybe he felt it. Maybe he knew. When we walked into Walter's room, the old man was reading one of Nick's letters aloud to himself. He looked up, confused for a second, then stared at Evan like he wasn't sure what was real. "You got taller," Walter said. "You got wiser," Evan replied. No more words. Just a long, quiet hug. Buster rested his head on Walter's foot again. For the next few weeks, Evan stayed in town. He brought his wife and their daughter, a bright-eyed 9-year-old named Ellie. She loved Millie from the first moment and insisted on walking her with a little pink leash. Buster allowed it but always walked slightly ahead, like he was teaching her the way. Ellie took to drawing like Nick, filling notebook after notebook with pictures of Buster. One day she came into the diner holding one out to me. "This one's special," she said. "See? It's Buster flying. He's helping lost people from the sky, like a guide dog for the world." I kept that one in my coat pocket. Every time I felt tired or unsure, I looked at it. By the end of March, the snow began to melt. Tiny green buds appeared on the trees, and you could feel the town stretching itself awake. The mayor announced plans for a spring festival at the park. Games, food, music, and a special tribute for Hartswell's favorite dog. Walter was asked to speak. "Only if Buster walks with me," he said. He wouldn't have it any other way. I replied. And as we planned and prepared and watched the snow disappear, I knew Buster was watching too. Not just the town, but the horizon. Always looking forward. Always waiting for the next trail to appear. The first Saturday of April dawned with a sky so blue it looked painted, the kind of day that felt like it had been waiting all winter just to be perfect. The Spring Festival had been circled on every calendar in Hartswell for weeks, and the park was already buzzing by 8 in the morning. Volunteers set up tents. Kids hung streamers. The scent of cinnamon kettle corn drifted across the grass as early risers lined up for fresh scones and hot cider. At the center of it all was the new sign, covered in a blue cloth and propped on 2 wooden posts. The town had kept the design a secret. Even Walter didn't know what it looked like. Mayor Adams had insisted the unveiling wait until everyone had arrived. Buster had slept well the night before. I watched him closely these days, always alert for any sign that he needed rest instead of attention. But this morning, he rose with a stretch and a soft snort, tail swaying as if he'd dreamed of sunshine. Millie, as always, bounced around like a wind-up toy. She'd been outfitted with a tiny Hartswell scarf tied around her neck, and when Ellie saw her, she squealed like it was Christmas morning. Walter arrived an hour before the ceremony. Evan pushed his wheelchair while Ellie held his hand. He was bundled in a light jacket and wore a small cap with a gold pin on it, his old welding badge from back in the day. Buster spotted him from across the park and walked straight to his side. "Well, look who's got good timing," Walter said, scratching behind Buster's ears. People gathered quickly. By 11, the green space was full. Kids sat cross-legged near the front. Old-timers leaned on canes or folding chairs. And right in the middle of it all was that blue-covered sign. Mayor Adams stepped up to the microphone, cleared her throat, and smiled. "Folks," she began, "this town's been through a lot in recent years. We've seen changes, we've said goodbye to old friends, but we've also seen something beautiful bloom. Right here, in the middle of Hartswell. It started with a howl. Then it grew into a story. Then that story grew into something bigger than any one person, or even one dog." She paused, gesturing to Walter. "Thanks to Walter Cooper, Brian McCleary, and most of all to Buster, this town found its heart again. Today, we honor that, and we make sure that long after we're gone, the story keeps going." She pulled back the cloth. The sign was carved from oak, stained a warm honey brown. Across the top were the words, "Buster's Trail, where every step finds a friend." Beneath was a relief carving of Buster himself, head tilted, ears perked, standing proudly beside a smaller pup meant to be Millie. And under that, in smaller lettering, "Dedicated to those who wait and those who listen." The crowd clapped, then stood in a long, heartfelt ovation. Walter wiped at his eyes, not hiding the tears. Then it was his turn to speak. The microphone was lowered to him, and Evan steadied his hand. "I never thought I'd be the kind of man people wanted to listen to," Walter began. "But I've learned something in these last months. You don't have to shout to be heard. Sometimes it's enough to sit with someone, to stay beside them, or to howl until someone comes to see why." He paused, looked down at Buster. "This dog didn't just find me. He found all of us, reminded us what it means to care without asking for anything back. He showed us that healing isn't something you do alone. It takes a village, a town, A whole mess of good-hearted folks willing to show up day after day. Walter nodded. So thank you for listening, for following him, for finding each other. There wasn't a dry eye near the stage. After the ceremony, the festival opened in full swing. There were booths with crafts, story corners with local authors reading animal tales, face-painting stations, and a mini obstacle course for the town's dogs. Millie ran the course 5 times before collapsing in a heap of excitement. Buster trotted through once, slow, dignified, and clearly just to humor the crowd. People stopped us constantly, to pet him, to thank him, to share their own stories. One man said he'd been estranged from his brother for over a decade, but after reading about Walter and Evan, he made a call. A teenager with blue-dyed hair told me that reading the articles about Buster had pulled her out of a bad stretch of depression. A grandmother whispered that her grandson, who used to be afraid of dogs, now asked for a puppy every night. And as the sun sank lower in the sky, casting everything in soft gold, Buster found a quiet spot beneath a maple tree and laid down. I sat beside him. Walter joined a few minutes later, wheeled over by Ellie. "You think he knows?" Walter asked softly. "Knows what?" "That he's changed so many lives, that he's become the heart of this town." Buster opened one eye, gave a single thump of his tail, then closed it again. "Yeah," I said. "I think he knows." Millie plopped down beside him, resting her head on his back. And for a moment, the festival faded into the background. The music, the laughter, the clinking of lemonade glasses and chatter of families, it all softened. Until all that remained was the sound of wind through new leaves and the quiet, steady breathing of a dog who had led us all to this place. A place that wasn't perfect. But it was better. And that mattered, because of him. But there were still more people to find, more hearts to reach. And Buster, slow, steady, watchful Buster, was still looking forward, still leading, one step at a time. By the following week, the maple tree had become a bit of a landmark. People brought lawn chairs and coffee just to sit under it. Kids made chalk drawings along the walkway that led to the tree, turning it into a colorful little trail of paw prints and hearts. One morning, someone left a small tin bowl of biscuits with a handwritten label that read, "For Buster, the mayor of our hearts." Buster took it all in stride. He still made his daily rounds with me, checking on Walter, visiting Benton House, and stopping by the diner just long enough to rest his paws and accept a bacon strip or two from Betty. He never let fame slow him down. But I could see the toll the years had taken. His steps were more careful now. He paused at stairs a little longer. And sometimes, on especially chilly mornings, he preferred to stay curled up on the truck seat until the sun was higher. Millie adjusted, too. She no longer darted ahead on walks. Instead, she lingered beside Buster, often bumping into his side gently like a nudge of encouragement. It wasn't just loyalty. It was her way of saying, "I've got you." One particular morning, Buster stopped in front of the old train station again, the same spot where we'd first found Emily. He stood there for a long time, nose lifted into the wind. I watched him carefully. Millie sat beside him, tail sweeping the dirt. "You smell something?" I asked. He didn't move. I followed his gaze toward the far edge of the lot, where the brush had thinned a bit since last fall. There was movement. At first I thought it might be a fox or stray cat, but then a figure stepped out. Thin, hooded, young. A boy, maybe 15. He looked startled to see us and immediately turned to run. "Hey, wait!" I called out, but he was already gone, vanishing into the backwoods like smoke. Buster didn't bark. He just stood still, watching the space where the boy had disappeared. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The way Buster had stood, as if he'd been expecting someone. Waiting. The same way he had for Walter, for Emily, even for George. I knew that look by now. It meant, we're not done. The next morning, I brought supplies. Canned food, a blanket, a flashlight, and a thermos of cocoa. I tucked them into a waterproof backpack and left them near the spot we'd seen the boy. Not hidden, but not obvious either. Just enough for someone scared to still feel safe. 2 days later, the bag was gone. But in its place was a small, hand-drawn note, folded and placed on a rock. "Thank you. Please don't tell." No name, just shaky handwriting and pencil. Walter read the note with a nod. "Another soul finding their way. Looks like your partner still knows where to lead." We started checking the spot every couple of days. Sometimes the backpack was untouched. Other times it was empty, so we'd refill it. I never saw the boy again, but I didn't need to. Buster did. He always walked a little taller afterward, as if his silent vigil had meaning again. Meanwhile, life in Hartswell pulsed forward. Ellie started a weekly reading circle at Pine Hill, bringing books and crafts to the residents. Nick from Benton House, inspired by his sketches of Buster, entered an art contest at the county fair. His portrait of Buster under the stars won first place. Walter was so proud, he asked for a copy to be framed in his room. One evening, Evan approached me after dinner at the care home. "I've been thinking," he said, "about staying, moving back for good." I raised my eyebrows. This town, it's not the same one I left. It's better. And maybe I want to be a part of what it's becoming. Ellie's made friends here. My wife's found a rhythm. And Dad, well, he's still here because of Buster. And maybe because of you, too. I didn't know what to say, but I felt something settle in my chest again. That breath of peace Buster always brought. The next day, we hosted a town cleanup event. Buster's trail needed tending after the spring rains, and dozens of folks came with rakes, gloves, and shovels. Kids picked up litter. Teens painted benches. The trail signs were cleaned, the flowers replanted. Buster watched from the shade with Millie, occasionally rising to inspect the progress. He walked the full loop at the end, slow but proud, sniffing each improvement as if checking it off a list. That evening, as we walked home, I glanced down at him. "You proud of this town?" He didn't wag his tail. He just looked up at me with that calm, knowing gaze, like the answer was obvious. The next morning, the boy returned. I was dropping off the fresh pack when I heard soft footsteps behind me. I turned slowly. He stood about 20 feet away, hands shoved in his hoodie pocket, eyes down. "I didn't steal it," he said quietly. "I know. I'm just passing through. You need anything else?" He shook his head, then looked at Buster. He's the one from the story. He is. The boy stepped closer. Buster didn't move, just waited. When the boy knelt down, Buster gently nudged his hand. "You gonna tell anyone I was here?" "Only if you need help. And only the kind that listens." He nodded, then stood. "I'll be gone soon. Just needed a place to think. Take what you need. The trail's open to everyone." He turned and walked off into the woods again, But this time, he didn't run. He moved slow, like someone walking a road instead of escaping one. Buster watched until he was gone, then sat down beside me. I didn't say anything. Neither did he. But in that moment, I understood something new. Buster wasn't just helping us find people. He was helping them find themselves. Spring stretched on. The trees filled out. The mornings warmed. And the trail saw more visitors than ever before. Folks walked their dogs there. Kids played. Seniors strolled slowly down the path, waving at each other. It became more than a park. It became a heartbeat. And at its center, always, was the dog who had waited in a parking lot long before anyone knew why. Still walking. Still watching. Still leading. And never done. Not even close. It was a Tuesday morning when I noticed Buster didn't get up right away. Millie had already bounced off the couch, nose pressed to the window, her usual energy firing on all cylinders. But Buster stayed where he was, eyes half closed, breathing deep and even. I knelt down beside him, gently touched his paw. His eyes fluttered open, and he gave a small, familiar tail wag. We didn't rush that morning. I called the diner, told Betty I'd be in late. She didn't ask why. She knew. I loaded Buster into the truck slowly, wrapped him in the fleece blanket Ellie had made him last Christmas. Millie curled up beside him for the ride. The sky outside was soft gray, the kind that seemed to muffle the world, make everything a little more still. We didn't go far, just to the park, to Buster's trail. I carried him the first few steps. He didn't protest, just rested his head on my arm, eyes open, watching the path. I set him down at the top of the first loop, near the bench where the kids had painted paw prints and daisies. He stood, slowly, stretched one leg at a time. Then he walked. Not fast, not strong, but with a purpose that needed no explanation. Millie stayed close. I followed behind, hands in my coat pocket, letting the silence speak. As we walked, people joined us. It wasn't planned. It wasn't a parade or a farewell or anything dramatic. Just quiet footsteps behind us. Ellie and Evan. Walter in his chair, being wheeled by Nurse Cindy. Nick from Benton House with a sketch pad clutched to his chest. The mayor. Betty. The boy from the woods, now standing taller, cleaner, with a sandwich in his hand he never stopped eating. Emily, her foster mom, by her side. No one said a word. Halfway through the loop, Buster stopped, turned his head, looked at all of us. Then he lay down in the grass, ears twitching, nose in the wind. I knelt beside him. "You've done good, buddy," I whispered. "More than good." He blinked slowly. Walter reached us. Evan helped him down beside Buster. Walter placed one hand on Buster's back. "Thank you," he said simply. Buster let out a breath so long it seemed to carry the weight of 100 days. His eyes stayed open a while longer, then slowly, gently, closed. And he rested. I don't know how long we stayed like that. No one moved. Even the wind was quiet. Millie licked his ear once, then lay down beside him. I pressed my hand to his side, feeling the rhythm slow. When it stopped, it was so peaceful I didn't realize it at first. I don't remember much of what came next. I remember Evan placing a hand on my shoulder. I remember Ellie sobbing quietly, being held by her mom. I remember the mayor kneeling, touching the grass beside Buster's paw. We carried him back together. Wrapped in his blanket, surrounded by the people he had brought together. Not with words, not with plans, but with heart. The town asked to bury him under the maple tree, the same one he'd rested beneath after the festival, the same one with the trail of chalk paw prints still faintly visible along the path. There was no question. It felt right. The mayor ordered a plaque, but it didn't need more than a few words. Buster, he found us. That weekend, people came from across the state. Some brought flowers, others brought drawings, letters, collars from dogs that had passed. Nick framed his portrait and hung it on the tree. The boy from the woods left a folded piece of paper. I read it later. It said, "He made me believe someone would wait for me." Life didn't stop after that. The diner still served pancakes. The park still echoed with laughter. Walter still told stories from his chair under the porch at Pine Hill. But something had shifted. Not a hole. Not a sadness that took over. It was something gentler, a reminder, a legacy. Millie grew quickly. She took up the trail in her own way, still full of joy, but now with a certain reverence. She'd pause at the benches Buster used to sit beside, then trot on like she had her own rounds to make. She wore a little tag now, not one that said "in training" or "emotional support." It just said "hope." The sign at the start of Buster's trail was updated. Someone added a second carving, right beneath Buster's, a younger dog with bright eyes and a tilted head. Millie. The trail continued. And so did the town, with new stories, new hearts found, new howls answered. Every so often, on quiet evenings, I still walk the loop alone. Sometimes Millie joins, sometimes she's off on her own adventures, but no matter what, I stop by the maple tree. I sit for a while. I close my eyes, and sometimes, just sometimes, I swear I hear the soft, steady breath of a dog beside me, a dog who never stopped leading, and never will.